Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
I stared at my phone screen, watching the Forbes notification that would change everything. My company CloudSync had just been valued at $84 million, and there it was in black and white for the entire world to see. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the article, seeing my name mentioned alongside tech industry giants I had admired for years. Without thinking, I called my parents, but it went straight to voicemail like always. Then I remembered Stanford graduation, my first startup launch, every single milestone they had missed. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad that made my stomach drop. The text message stared back at me like a slap across the face. Family dinner at 8 p.m. Important discussion. After 26 years of life, this was the first time my father had ever initiated contact about anything related to my career or achievements. I set my phone down on my kitchen counter and felt that familiar hollow ache in my chest, the one that had been my constant companion since childhood. The memories came flooding back like a broken dam. I was 16 again, standing on the stage at the National Science Fair in Phoenix, holding the first-place trophy for my revolutionary solar panel design that could increase efficiency by 30%. The auditorium was packed with proud parents and families, but my seat section remained empty. My parents had chosen to drive 3 hours to watch my brother Jake play in a high school basketball tournament instead. When I called them that night, Dad's voice was distracted background noise of a sports bar drowning out my excitement. "That's nice, Bruce," he had said. "Jake scored 22 points tonight. Coach thinks he might get a college scholarship." 4 years later, I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford University with a degree in computer engineering. My GPA was 3.97. I had already secured 3 job offers from major tech companies, and I was delivering the valedictorian speech to 8,000 people. The morning of graduation, Mom called to tell me they couldn't make it because my cousin Sarah was getting married in Denver that same weekend. "Family obligations, honey," she explained. "Sarah specifically requested that we be there. You understand?" I understood that Sarah, who I had seen maybe 10 times in my entire life, somehow ranked higher than their own son's college graduation. I walked across that stage alone, collected my diploma with no one cheering my name, and spent the celebration dinner eating pizza by myself in my dorm room. The pattern continued relentlessly. When I launched my first startup, TechFlow, from my garage apartment in Palo Alto, I invited them to the product launch event. We had developed a customer relationship management software that small businesses desperately needed, and after 18 months of 80-hour work weeks, we were finally ready to go public. The event was held at a beautiful venue in downtown San Francisco, with investors, potential clients, and local media in attendance. They never showed up. 3 months later, TechFlow was acquired by a larger company for $3 million. I was 24 years old and had just become a millionaire. When I called to share the news, Dad's response was colder than I expected. "That's good, I suppose," he said. "Though I still think you should have gotten a real job with benefits and stability. This computer stuff is just a fad." Meanwhile, every family gathering revolved around Jake's latest construction project, or his new girlfriend, or his plans to start his own contracting business. When he bought his first house at 25, my parents threw him a housewarming party and invited 40 people. When he got married 2 years later, they spent $15,000 on the rehearsal dinner alone. When his wife Linda announced her pregnancy, Mom cried tears of joy and immediately started planning the baby shower. I had built a $3 million company from nothing, and they acted like I had won a participation trophy. The worst part was discovering how they talked about me behind my back. Last Christmas, I overheard my Aunt Margaret talking to my mother in the kitchen. She asked why I wasn't married yet, why I didn't seem to have any close friends, why I always looked so tired at family events. Bruce has always been difficult. Mom replied, her voice carrying that tone of patient suffering she reserved for discussing my life choices. He chases these impossible dreams with computers and technology. We've tried to guide him towards something more practical, but he won't listen. He's just not like Jake, you know? Jake has his feet on the ground. That conversation played in my head for months. They saw my ambition as stubbornness, my success as luck, my dedication as obsession. Nothing I accomplished would ever measure up to Jake's conventional path of marriage mortgage and manual labor. Emma, my girlfriend of 8 months, had noticed the family photos in my apartment, or rather the lack of them. She found it strange that a 26-year-old man had no pictures of holidays, graduations, or celebrations with his family. When I tried to explain, she looked at me with such genuine confusion that I realized how abnormal my situation really was. "They just don't understand what you do," she asked. "They don't want to understand," I corrected. "There's a difference." The phone call that broke me came 6 months ago. I had been working on CloudSync for 2 years, building it from my garage while working double shifts at a technical support center to pay rent. The company was gaining serious traction, and I had just signed my first major corporate client. I was exhausted running on coffee and determination, but I was proud of what I was building. I called my parents to share the news about the client contract, hoping maybe this time would be different. Dad answered on the 4th ring. "Bruce, this really isn't a good time," he said. "Jake's having some trouble with his business and we're trying to help him figure things out. I just wanted to tell you about my company. I started. Your little computer hobby." Dad's voice carried that familiar note of dismissive irritation. "Son, you need to start thinking about your future seriously. You can't live in fantasy land forever." I hung up without saying goodbye and sat in my car in the parking lot of the support center crying for the first time in years. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. I stopped calling them, stopped sending updates about my progress, stopped hoping for their approval or acknowledgement. And something incredible happened. Without the constant weight of their disappointment, I flourished. CloudSync grew from 3 employees to 43 in 18 months. We secured contracts with Fortune 500 companies. We opened offices in Seattle, Austin, and Boston. We developed encryption technology that major corporations now depend on to protect their most sensitive data. I succeeded not because of my family's support, but in spite of their neglect. Now, staring at that Forbes article with my name prominently featured, I realized they were finally reaching out. Not because they were proud of me or because they recognized my hard work, but because $84 million was a number even they couldn't ignore. The text message sat on my screen like a loaded weapon. "Family dinner at 8 p.m., important discussion." After 26 years, they wanted to have an important discussion. The irony was almost laughable. I had given them countless opportunities for important discussions about my dreams, my goals, my achievements, and my struggles. They had chosen basketball games and weddings and construction projects instead. Now they wanted to talk. The CloudSync headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming office building in downtown Seattle, a far cry from the cramped garage where I had started this journey. Walking through the open workspace that morning, watching my 43 employees collaborating on projects that would reshape cloud security for major corporations, I felt a familiar pang of loneliness. Every milestone, every breakthrough, every victory had been celebrated with my team and Emma, but never with the people who should have mattered most. My assistant Sarah handed me a stack of congratulatory messages that had poured in since the Forbes article went live. Stanford classmates who had followed my career from a distance, former colleagues from my early days in Silicon Valley, even my high school computer science teacher had reached out to say how proud she was of my achievements. The warmth and recognition from near strangers only highlighted the deafening silence from my own family. CloudSync had revolutionized the way companies approached data security. Our proprietary encryption algorithm could protect sensitive information while still allowing seamless collaboration across multiple platforms and geographic locations. What had started as my frustrated response to watching small businesses lose everything to cyber attacks had evolved into a comprehensive security solution that Fortune 500 companies now considered essential. The journey to this Forbes recognition had been brutally difficult. While working those double shifts at the technical support center, I would come home exhausted and spend 4 more hours coding, testing, and refining CloudSync's core technology. My garage became my laboratory, filled with servers I had bought secondhand, and assembled myself, creating a makeshift data center that would have made my Stanford professors laugh. But the technology worked. More importantly, it worked better than anything else on the market. My first major breakthrough came when I solved a problem that had stumped entire teams of engineers at established companies. Traditional cloud security required users to choose between protection and accessibility, but CloudSync's innovation allowed for both simultaneously. Companies could store their most sensitive data with military-grade encryption, while still allowing authorized employees to collaborate in real time from anywhere in the world. The validation came from unexpected sources. A small medical practice in Portland became my first paying customer after their previous security system failed and exposed patient records. Within 6 months, they had referred me to 3 other practices. A local law firm signed on after hearing about our success with the medical practice. Word spread through professional networks, and suddenly I was fielding calls from companies in different states, different industries, different scales of operation. Emma had been there for every small victory and every crushing setback. She understood the long nights, the constant stress, the financial uncertainty of building something from nothing. When I finally quit my support center job to focus on CloudSync full-time, she helped me stretch my savings and celebrated when we landed our first 6-figure contract. "You should invite your parents to the product launch event," she had suggested last year when CloudSync was preparing to unveil our enterprise-level security platform. The event was going to be held at a downtown hotel with demonstrations for potential corporate clients and presentations from cybersecurity experts who had agreed to endorse our technology. I had sent the invitation anyway, hoping against hope that this achievement might be significant enough to earn their attention. The response came from Mom 2 days later. "Thank you for thinking of us, honey, but we already have plans that weekend. Jake is playing in the city softball championship and we promised we would be there. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. A grown man playing recreational softball took precedence over his younger brother's professional achievement. The pattern was so consistent it had become predictable. The product launch event was a spectacular success without them. 3 major corporations signed contracts that night, and 2 investors approached me about funding opportunities. Local media covered the story, and a tech industry publication wrote a feature article about CloudSync's innovative approach to cloud security. I went home that night feeling proud and hollow at the same time. The Forbes article detailed every aspect of my journey from the garage startup to the current $84 million valuation. It mentioned the Fortune 500 clients who now relied on CloudSync's technology, the jobs we had created, the industry standards we had helped establish. The journalist had interviewed employees who described me as a visionary leader, investors who called CloudSync the future of data security, and competitors who admitted they were scrambling to match our innovation. Reading about my own success in such prestigious terms felt surreal. This was the recognition I had dreamed about since those early days when I was coding alone in my garage, surviving on coffee and determination. The article would be read by millions of people, including industry leaders, potential partners, and ambitious entrepreneurs who might see my story as inspiration for their own journeys. But the people whose opinion had shaped my entire life remained silent. I thought about my sister Amy, who I barely knew despite living only 2 hours away. My parents had somehow convinced her that I was too busy and successful to maintain family relationships, creating a wall between us that I only recently discovered existed. When I tried calling her last month, she seemed surprised to hear from me. "I didn't think you would want to talk to me," she admitted. "Mom and Dad always said you were focused on your career and didn't have time for family stuff." The manipulation was breathtaking in its completeness. They had isolated me from my own sister while simultaneously telling everyone else that I was the one who had chosen isolation. They controlled the narrative so effectively that even Amy believed I was the problem. During our conversation, Amy revealed something that broke my heart. She had started a small graphic design business 2 years ago, inspired by stories she had heard about my entrepreneurship. But she kept it secret from our parents because they had made it clear that following my example would be a mistake. They said, "Look what happened to you," Amy explained. "Always working never settled no real relationships. They made it sound like success in business meant failure in life." I wanted to tell her about Emma, about the meaningful friendships I had built with my employees, about the satisfaction of creating something valuable and lasting. But Amy and I were strangers, separated by years of deliberate misinformation and manufactured distance. The Forbes recognition represented more than financial success. It validated every risk I had taken, every night I had worked until dawn, every time I had chosen to believe in my vision, when everyone else expressed doubt. But knowing that my own parents would only care because of the money attached to that validation made the achievement feel tainted. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, my phone buzzed with another text from Dad. "Looking forward to seeing you tonight. We have a lot to discuss." I could read between the lines. They needed something, and for the first time in my life, I had something they wanted. The Forbes article had changed the power dynamic completely, and they were scrambling to reposition themselves as supportive family members who had always believed in my potential. But I remembered every missed phone call, every dismissive comment, every time they had chosen someone else's minor achievement over my major milestones. Tonight's dinner would not be the reunion they were probably expecting. It would be a reckoning. The Forbes article continued to gain momentum throughout the afternoon, shared across social media platforms by industry professionals and aspiring entrepreneurs. My phone buzzed constantly with LinkedIn notifications, congratulatory emails, and text messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Each notification was a small validation, a digital pat on the back from the professional community that had watched CloudSync grow from an ambitious startup to an industry leader. But the silence from my family remained deafening. Emma called during her lunch break, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Have you seen how many people are sharing this? My entire office is talking about dating someone who got featured in Forbes. I'm basically famous by association now." Her enthusiasm was infectious, but I couldn't shake the growing dread about the evening's dinner invitation. Something about Dad's text felt calculated, rehearsed, like he had spent considerable time crafting those exact words to strike the right tone of casual authority. "You don't have to go," Emma reminded me. "You've built an incredible life without their support. You don't owe them anything just because they suddenly want to acknowledge your success." She was right, but part of me needed to see this through. After 26 years of feeling like the family disappointment, I wanted to understand what had changed in their minds. Was it purely financial, or was there some genuine recognition of what I had accomplished? I decided to drive past their house before heading to my apartment to change clothes. The familiar suburban street looked exactly as I remembered from childhood, with its carefully maintained lawns and matching mailboxes. Dad's truck was parked in the driveway next to Mom's sedan, but I was surprised to see Jake's construction vehicle there as well. He wasn't supposed to be part of this dinner, at least not according to Dad's text message. The presence of Jake's truck told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about acknowledging my success or repairing our relationship. This was about money, and they wanted Jake involved because whatever they were planning affected him too. I parked across the street and sat there for several minutes, watching the house where I had grown up feeling invisible. The windows glowed with warm yellow light, and I could see figures moving around inside. From the outside, it looked like the picture of domestic happiness, the kind of family home that appeared in advertisements for insurance companies or breakfast cereals. But appearances had always been important to my parents. They maintained their marriage, their house, and their relationships with the same attention to surface details that they applied to their front lawn. Everything needed to look perfect, even if the foundation underneath was rotting. My phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. Amy's name appeared on the screen, which surprised me since we hadn't spoken since that conversation last month about her secret design business. Bruce. Her voice sounded nervous, uncertain. I just saw the Forbes article. I wanted to congratulate you, but I also wanted to ask you something. What's on your mind? Mom called me this morning. She said Dad is having a family dinner tonight and that I should come. She made it sound like it was about you, about your success. But she also said some things that didn't make sense. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What kind of things? She said you had finally agreed to help with some family financial issues, and that tonight we were going to discuss how your company's success could benefit everyone. But that doesn't sound like something you would agree to without talking to me about it first. The manipulation was starting even before I arrived. They were already creating a narrative where I had volunteered to solve their financial problems, setting up expectations that would make me look selfish if I refused to cooperate. Amy, I haven't agreed to anything. This is the first time they've contacted me about my business in 2 years. The only thing I agreed to was having dinner. There was a long pause. They're in trouble, aren't they? Financially, I mean. What makes you say that? Little things I've noticed. Dad working longer hours, Mom being more stressed about money, Jake seeming worried about something he won't discuss. And now suddenly they care about your success when they've spent years acting like it doesn't matter. Amy was more perceptive than I had given her credit for. Despite being the youngest and most sheltered member of our family, she had been paying attention to the undercurrents that the adults thought they were hiding. Would you like to come to dinner tonight? I asked impulsively. I think it would be good for you to see this conversation happen. Are you sure it might get uncomfortable? I'm counting on it getting uncomfortable, but I think you deserve to understand how this family really works, and I could use someone there who isn't trying to manipulate me. Amy agreed to meet me at the house, and I spent the next hour driving around Seattle thinking about what I wanted to accomplish at this dinner. Part of me wanted to walk in there and dominate the conversation to make them acknowledge every slight and every missed opportunity. But a larger part of me just wanted honesty for once. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn their respect and recognition. Tonight I wanted to understand why they had withheld it, and whether anything I could do would ever be enough to change their fundamental view of me. The Forbes article represented the culmination of everything I had worked for, but it also represented something darker. It proved that my family's love and support were conditional on external validation and financial success. They hadn't been proud of me when I was struggling in my garage working 18-hour days and believing in a vision that nobody else understood. They were only interested now that the rest of the world had deemed me successful. That realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. Liberating because it freed me from the illusion that their approval was based on anything meaningful. Heartbreaking because it confirmed that I had been right to feel like an outsider in my own family. As I finally headed home to change clothes for dinner, I made a decision that would shape the entire evening. I wasn't going to this dinner as the eager son hoping for approval and acceptance. I was going as the CEO of an $84 million company with the confidence and authority that title implied. If they wanted to discuss business, we would discuss business. But we would do it on my terms with complete honesty about our past and clear expectations for our future. The Forbes article had changed the power dynamic between us forever. Tonight, they would learn exactly how much. I stood in my apartment closet, debating what to wear to a dinner that felt more like a business negotiation than a family reunion. The Forbes magazine lay open on my dresser, my photo smiling back at me from a page that represented everything my parents had dismissed for years. Emma sat cross-legged on my bed, watching me with concern as I pulled out different shirt options. "You're overthinking this," she said gently. "Just be yourself. The same person who built CloudSync from nothing is more than capable of handling whatever they throw at you tonight." But that was the problem. The person who built CloudSync had learned to succeed without their support, which meant I had no experience dealing with them from a position of strength. For my entire life, these dinners had been exercises in feeling inadequate, sitting at that familiar table, while Jake's achievements were celebrated and my own accomplishments were either ignored or subtly criticized. Tonight would be different because I was different. The Forbes recognition had given me something I had never possessed in that house before: undeniable external validation. They couldn't dismiss or minimize an $84 million valuation, which meant they had to approach me with a level of respect they had never shown before. I decided on a simple but expensive button-down shirt, something that looked casual but clearly cost more than Dad spent on clothes in 6 months. The message needed to be subtle but clear. I was successful. I was confident, and I was no longer the struggling son looking for approval. Emma drove me to my parents' house, promising to wait nearby in case I needed an escape route. "Call me if it gets weird," she said, kissing me goodbye. "And remember, you don't owe them anything just because they're family." Her words echoed in my mind as I walked up the driveway where I had learned to ride a bicycle, where I had practiced basketball shots that never earned Dad's attention, where I had dreamed of becoming someone important enough to matter. The house looked smaller than I remembered, its white siding slightly faded, and the front porch showing signs of deferred maintenance. I knocked instead of using my old key, a small gesture that established me as a guest rather than a family member. Mom answered the door with a smile that seemed forced, her eyes scanning my appearance with the calculating attention she usually reserved for evaluating other people's children. "Bruce, honey, you look wonderful. So successful." She hugged me with an enthusiasm that felt foreign after years of perfunctory greetings. "Everyone's so excited to see you." The living room had been rearranged since my last visit, with the furniture positioned to create a more formal conversation area. Jake sat in Dad's usual recliner, his wife Linda beside him on the couch, both of them wearing expressions of uncomfortable anticipation. Amy had arrived before me and chosen a chair slightly apart from everyone else, giving me a supportive nod when I entered. Dad stood up from his chair with an authority that seemed rehearsed, extending his hand for a handshake instead of his usual awkward side hug. "Son, congratulations on the Forbes article. We're all very proud of what you've accomplished." The word proud hung in the air like an unwelcome intruder. He had never used that word to describe his feelings about my achievements, and hearing it now felt like an insult to every milestone they had ignored. "Thank you," I replied, simply taking a seat across from him, where I could see everyone's faces clearly. The positioning felt strategic, like a boardroom meeting where I needed to read expressions and body language to understand the real agenda. Mom brought out appetizers and drinks, treating the evening like a special occasion, instead of the ordinary family dinner Dad's text had implied. The fancy plates and cloth napkins sent a clear message this dinner was important to them, in a way that contradicted years of treating me like an afterthought. The conversation started with safe topics. Linda asked about my employees and office space, showing more interest in CloudSync in 5 minutes than my parents had demonstrated in 2 years. Jake seemed uncomfortable, but made an effort to engage, asking questions about the Forbes selection process and what it meant for my company's future. Amy remained mostly quiet, but I caught her watching our parents with a new awareness, like she was seeing their behavior from a different perspective for the first time. The article had clearly prompted conversations in this house that hadn't included me discussions about my success and what it meant for their family dynamic. 20 minutes into the dinner, Dad cleared his throat and leaned forward in his chair, with the serious expression he reserved for important announcements. "Bruce, we wanted to talk to you about something tonight. As a family, we've always believed in supporting each other through difficult times." The setup was so transparent it was almost laughable. This wasn't about family support. It was about financial need. They had spent years demonstrating that family support flowed in one direction only toward Jake and his conventional life choices, and away from my unconventional career path. "I'm listening," I said, neutrally curious to see how they would frame their request. "Jake's construction business has hit some challenges lately." Dad continued glancing at my brother before looking back at me. "The housing market slowdown has affected a lot of contractors, and he's had to make some tough decisions about his company." Jake's face flushed red, clearly embarrassed to be discussed like he wasn't in the room. But he didn't interrupt, which told me this conversation had been planned and rehearsed before my arrival. At the same time, Dad went on, "Your mother and I are looking at some financial adjustments as we get closer to retirement. We've always believed that families should help each other, and now that you're in a position to provide that help, we wanted to discuss how we might work together." The euphemisms were almost artistic in their careful construction. Jake's business hadn't hit challenges. It was probably failing completely. My parents weren't making financial adjustments. They were likely facing serious money problems, and I wasn't in a position to provide help. I was their solution to problems they had created without involving me. "What specific kind of help are you looking for?" I asked. Mom jumped into the conversation with nervous energy. "Well, just family support. Maybe some guidance about business decisions or investment opportunities or ways that your success could help all of us succeed together." Investment opportunities. Ways that my success could help all of us. They weren't even trying to disguise it anymore. I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA but had never shared my struggles or my dreams. They had gathered here tonight with a plan to extract money from my success, while carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of how they had treated me during the years when their support might have actually mattered. Amy was watching me intently, probably wondering how I would respond to this transparent manipulation. Emma had been right when she warned me that this dinner invitation was motivated by financial need rather than genuine reconciliation. But I had come here with my own agenda, and it was time to reveal it. "Before we talk about how I might help the family," I said slowly, "I think we need to discuss how the family has helped me." The room went quiet, except for the sound of Dad's fingers drumming nervously against his chair. They hadn't prepared for this conversation to go in reverse. It was time to change the dynamic completely. The silence in the room stretched longer than comfortable, filled with the kind of tension that happens when everyone knows a conversation is about to go somewhere. No one wants it to go. Mom fidgeted with her napkin. Jake stared at his hands, and Dad maintained the forced smile of someone trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping away from him. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," Dad finally said, his voice carrying that careful tone he used when trying to avoid arguments. "We've always supported your endeavors, Bruce. Maybe not always in the ways you wanted, but families show support differently." Amy's eyebrows shot up at this revisionist history, and I could see her connecting the dots between what she was hearing now and the conversations she had observed over the years. Linda looked confused, probably wondering why a simple family dinner was turning into something that felt more like a deposition. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, setting it on the coffee table in front of me. It was a printout of every major achievement in my life over the past 10 years, with dates and locations listed next to each one. I had prepared this document while getting dressed, anticipating that my parents would try to rewrite history to make themselves seem more supportive than they had actually been. Let me refresh everyone's memory. I said, unfolding the paper. National Science Fair, first place, Phoenix, Arizona, May 15th, 2017. I was 16 years old, and I called you from the winner's circle. You were at Jake's basketball tournament in Sacramento. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He probably remembered that tournament. His team had lost in the second round, making my parents' choice to attend even more pointless in retrospect. Stanford University graduation, summa cum laude. June 10th, 2021. I continued. I was giving the valedictorian speech to 8,000 people. You were at Cousin Sarah's wedding in Denver because she specifically requested your presence. Mom opened her mouth to interject, but I held up my hand and kept reading. TechFlow product launch, San Francisco, September 3rd, 2022. Company valuation at $3 million. I sent you an invitation 2 weeks in advance. You declined because Jake was playing in a softball tournament. Now hold on just a minute. Dad interrupted, his careful composure starting to crack. You're making this sound much more dramatic than it was. We had commitments, Bruce. We couldn't just drop everything whenever you had some computer event. The phrase, computer event, hung in the air like a smoking gun. Even now, even after Forbes had validated my achievements in terms they couldn't ignore, Dad was still diminishing my accomplishments as hobby projects that didn't deserve serious attention. Amy was staring at Dad with an expression I had never seen before, like she was seeing him clearly for the first time in her life. Computer event, she repeated. Dad, he just got featured in Forbes magazine for building an $84 million company. We know that, sweetheart, Mom said, quickly shooting Amy a warning look. We're very proud of Bruce's success. That's why we wanted to have this dinner to celebrate as a family. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You wanted to celebrate. Where was the celebration when I worked 18-hour days for 2 years building CloudSync from my garage? Where was the family support when I was eating ramen noodles and sleeping on an air mattress because I had invested every dollar I owned into my company? The room went dead silent. Even Jake looked uncomfortable now, probably realizing that his own struggles with his construction business paled in comparison to the challenges I had faced alone. You want to know what family support looks like? I continued, my voice getting stronger. Emma helped me move servers in my garage when I couldn't afford professional equipment installation. My college roommate Tom invested $5,000 in CloudSync when I needed capital for licensing fees. Sarah, my assistant, worked for half salary for 6 months because she believed in what we were building. I looked around the room at each of their faces, seeing varying degrees of guilt, defensiveness, and recognition. But my own parents, my own brother, you were too busy with basketball games and softball tournaments and wedding receptions to even acknowledge that I was trying to build something meaningful. Jake finally spoke up, his voice defensive, but quieter than usual. It's not like you made it easy to support you, Bruce. You were always so secretive about your projects, always acting like you didn't need anyone's help. I was secretive because every time I shared my goals with this family, they were dismissed as unrealistic fantasies. I acted like I didn't need help because asking for help from you people was like asking for water from a stone. Linda was looking back and forth between Jake and me like she was watching a tennis match, probably getting more insight into her husband's family dynamics than she had bargained for. Mom was twisting her napkin into knots, and Dad was developing the angry flush that meant he was about to lose his temper. You know what the really pathetic part is? I continued feeling years of suppressed frustration finally finding their voice. I kept hoping you would surprise me. Even after Stanford, even after TechFlow, even after CloudSync started succeeding, part of me kept thinking that eventually you would recognize what I was accomplishing and decide to be proud of me. Amy's eyes were filling with tears, and I realized she was probably thinking about her own secret design business, wondering if she would face the same dismissal and lack of support if she ever decided to pursue her entrepreneurial dreams openly. But you never did, I said, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. You never called to ask how the company was doing. You never visited my office to see what I had built. You never introduced me to your friends as your son, the entrepreneur. You treated my success like it was an embarrassment, something to be tolerated rather than celebrated. Dad slammed his hand down on the arm of his chair, making everyone jump. That's enough, Bruce. You're being dramatic and unfair. We may not understand your business, but we never said we weren't proud of you. You never said you were proud of me either. I shot back. Not once, not ever. Until tonight when Forbes forced you to acknowledge that maybe I wasn't the family failure you had convinced yourselves I was. The truth was finally out in the open, ugly and undeniable. 26 years of disappointment and neglect couldn't be erased by one awkward dinner invitation motivated by financial desperation. Amy was the first person to break the silence that followed my outburst. Is that really how you see Bruce? She asked, looking directly at our parents. As a family failure, Mom started to protest, but Amy kept talking, her voice growing stronger with each word. Because from where I'm sitting, he's the only one in this family who took a risk and succeeded. He's the only one who built something from nothing. He's the only one who got written about in a national magazine. And instead of celebrating him, you're sitting here trying to figure out how to benefit from his success. The room felt like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared, with casualties scattered everywhere, and no clear winner. But for the first time in my life, I felt like someone in my family truly understood who I was and what I had accomplished. It was just the wrong family member 20 years too late. The silence following Amy's words felt like the moment before a storm breaks heavy with the weight of accusations that couldn't be taken back. Dad's face had progressed from flushed to a deep red color that meant his carefully maintained composure was about to shatter completely. Mom looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch cushions, and Jake was staring at the floor with the expression of someone who had just realized he was on the wrong side of an argument he didn't fully understand. Amy, honey. Mom started her voice, taking on that patronizing tone she used when trying to manage family conflicts. You don't understand all the complexities involved here. Bruce has always been very independent, very focused on his own goals. We've tried to be supportive, but he's made it clear over the years that he doesn't need our input. I made it clear. I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. Mom, let me tell you what I made clear. I made it clear that I wanted you at my graduation. I made it clear that I wanted you at my product launch. I made it clear that I wanted you to care about the most important moments of my life. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app, scrolling through several recordings I had made over the past 2 years. Emma had suggested documenting conversations with my family after I told her about some of their more dismissive comments, partly for my own clarity, and partly because she couldn't believe the things I was describing actually happened. Would you like to hear what you actually said about my goals? I asked, hovering my thumb over the first recording. Because I have documentation. Dad's eyes narrowed dangerously. You recorded our private family conversations. I recorded conversations where my own parents bad-mouthed my life choices to other family members. I corrected. There's a difference. I pressed play on the first recording. Mom's voice filled the room crystal clear from a family barbecue 8 months ago, where she thought I was out of earshot. Margaret was asking about Bruce again, Mom's recorded voice said. I told her he's still doing that computer nonsense, working all hours, no real relationships, no stability. I worry he's going to end up alone and bitter. You know, look at him compared to Jake. Jake has a wife, a house, a real business with actual customers you can see and touch. The color drained from Mom's face as her own words played back to her. Linda was staring at her mother-in-law with obvious shock, probably realizing that this level of family dysfunction extended far beyond anything she had witnessed during holiday visits. I pressed play on a second recording, this one from Dad, during a phone conversation 6 months ago, when I had called to tell him about CloudSync's first $1 million contract. I don't know why Bruce thinks these computer games are going to support him long-term, Dad's voice said clearly, talking to someone else while I was on hold. He's 26 years old and still playing around with fantasy projects instead of getting a real job. Sometimes I think we failed him, somehow didn't teach him the value of hard work and practical thinking. Jake winced at hearing Dad dismiss 2 years of 18-hour workdays as playing around, but he still didn't speak up to defend me. The pattern of passive complicity ran deep in this family. And here's my personal favorite, I said, scrolling to a third recording from Christmas dinner 3 months ago. This is what you told Uncle Robert when he asked why I wasn't married yet. Amy looked like she was bracing herself for impact as Dad's recorded voice filled the room again. Bruce has always been selfish with his time and attention. The recording played. He's more interested in his computers than in building real relationships with real people. Emma seems nice enough, but I can't imagine any woman putting up with his work schedule and his obsession with these business fantasies for very long. Emma's name in that recording hit differently than the other insults, partly because it proved they had been discussing my relationship behind my back, and partly because it showed how little they understood about the woman who had supported me through every challenge of building CloudSync. Amy was crying now, tears of anger rather than sadness. How could you say those things about your own son? Those recordings are taken out of context, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Private conversations between family members shared without permission. The context, I replied evenly, is that you have spent years sabotaging my reputation within our own extended family. You have portrayed my dedication as obsession, my success as luck, and my relationship as doomed. You have actively discouraged other family members from supporting my ventures or taking my achievements seriously. Linda was looking at Jake with an expression that suggested some uncomfortable conversations would be happening in their house tonight. She was probably wondering what other family dynamics she had misunderstood, what other dismissive comments had shaped her perception of her brother-in-law. But the most damaging thing you did, I continued, was convince Amy that I was too busy and successful to maintain relationships with my own family. You created a wall between us based on lies about my priorities and my character. Amy wiped her eyes and looked directly at our parents. Is that true? Did you tell me Bruce didn't want a relationship with me? Mom's silence was answer enough, but Dad apparently felt the need to dig the hole deeper. We were protecting you, sweetheart. Bruce has always been different, always focused on himself and his projects. We didn't want you to get hurt by his inability to prioritize family relationships. His inability. Amy's voice rose to a level I had never heard before. Or your inability to accept that he chose a different path than the one you planned for him. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Instead of the eager son seeking approval, I had become the successful businessman confronting former detractors. Instead of the protected younger sister, Amy had become an independent adult, recognizing long-term manipulation. Instead of the authoritative parents managing family relationships, Mom and Dad had become the people whose prejudices and failures were being exposed. Jake finally spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. Maybe we should talk about why we're really here tonight. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised that he was finally engaging with the conversation instead of trying to avoid it. The truth is, my business is failing. Jake continued, his pride clearly struggling with the admission. I owe more money than I can repay, and I'm probably going to lose everything I've worked for over the past 5 years. The honesty was jarring after an evening of euphemisms and careful phrasing. Mom and Dad refinanced their house to help me 6 months ago. Jake went on, and that money is almost gone too. We're all in serious financial trouble, and when the Forbes article came out, it seemed like maybe Bruce could help us figure out a solution. Finally, someone was telling the truth about why I was sitting in this room. So this dinner, I said slowly, was never about pride or family reconciliation or celebrating my success. This was about money. It's about family helping family. Dad protested. but even he seemed to realize how hollow that sounded after everything that had been revealed tonight. Family helping family, I repeated. Where was that philosophy when I needed help? Where was family helping family when I was working support center shifts to pay rent while building my company? Where was family helping family when I was eating ramen noodles and sleeping on air mattresses because every dollar I earned went back into Cloud Sync? Amy stood up from her chair with the decisive movement of someone who had just made an important decision. I'm moving out, she announced, looking directly at our parents. And I'm starting my design business with Bruce's help if he'll give it to me. The room exploded into chaos as Mom started protesting and Dad demanded explanations. But Amy held up her hand for silence with an authority that reminded me of myself in boardroom presentations. I've been watching this family tear down the most successful person in it for years, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. I've been listening to you convince me that following my dreams would be a mistake, that taking risks was foolish, that conventional paths were the only safe choices. But Bruce took risks and he succeeded. He built something amazing while you were busy being ashamed of him. She looked at me with an expression of determination and regret. I'm sorry I believed them about you. I'm sorry I didn't reach out years ago. And I'm sorry they made you feel like you didn't belong in your own family. For the first time in my adult life, someone in my family was choosing to stand with me instead of against me. It felt like winning and losing at the same time. 2 hours later, I sat in my car in the driveway with Amy in the passenger seat. Both of us emotionally drained from the confrontation that had upended 26 years of family dynamics. The dinner had ended with Dad storming out of his own living room, Mom crying into her hands, and Jake sitting in stunned silence as the full scope of their financial problems became clear. Amy had packed a bag while our parents pleaded with her to reconsider, to think about the consequences of her decision, to remember that family was more important than business opportunities. But she had heard enough empty appeals to family loyalty to last a lifetime. Especially after learning how they had systematically undermined my relationship with her for years. Where will you go tonight? I asked, still processing the surreal turn of events that had led to my sister choosing exile from our family home. I was hoping I could stay with you and Emma for a few days, she said nervously. Just until I figure out an apartment situation. I have some money saved from my design work, but not enough for a security deposit yet. Of course, I replied without hesitation. Emma will be thrilled to help you get settled. She's been wanting to meet you properly for months. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the house where we had grown up, learning very different lessons about success, failure, and family loyalty. The porch light cast long shadows across the front yard, where Jake and I used to play catch until he outgrew the need for a younger brother's company. Do you think they'll ever understand what they did wrong? Amy asked quietly. I considered the question, carefully thinking about the expressions on our parents' faces, when their own recorded words played back to them, when their manipulation tactics were exposed, when the consequences of their choices became undeniable. I think they understand that their strategy backfired, I said finally. They spent years betting against me, and now they need me to solve problems they created by supporting Jake's conventional choices. That has to be a difficult reality to face. But do you think they understand that they hurt you? That they made you feel unwanted in your own family? That was a much harder question to answer. Understanding the strategic failure of their approach was different from recognizing the emotional damage they had inflicted. They might regret the financial consequences of alienating their successful son without ever truly comprehending the personal cost of their favoritism and neglect. I don't think they're capable of that level of self-awareness. I admitted. They see themselves as good parents who made reasonable decisions based on the information they had at the time. They'll probably convince themselves that I was oversensitive, that they were trying to help me develop independence, that families naturally have different levels of closeness with different children. Amy nodded sadly. probably thinking about the years of manipulation she had accepted as normal family dynamics. What happens now? With them, I had been wrestling with that question since leaving the house. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also burned bridges that might never be rebuilt. Part of me felt satisfied that they finally understood the cost of their choices, but another part mourned the loss of any possibility for genuine family reconciliation. "I think we maintain very limited contact," I said. "Birthday cards, maybe holiday greetings, the bare minimum to avoid complete estrangement. But the relationship they wanted tonight, where I solve their financial problems and pretend the past 26 years didn't happen, that's not going to exist. Ew. And if they apologize, really apologize, not just say sorry for the misunderstanding." I thought about that scenario, imagining my parents acknowledging their mistakes with genuine remorse and accountability. It was possible, though unlikely, given their demonstrated capacity for self-deception. If they do the work to understand what they did wrong, if they take responsibility for the damage they caused, if they prove over time that they've actually changed their perspective about my choices and my value as a family member, then maybe we could rebuild something, I said. But it would take years of consistent effort on their part, and I'm not holding my breath. Amy reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for standing up for both of us tonight, and thank you for giving me the chance to choose a different path than the one they planned for me." Driving home with my sister beside me, I reflected on the strange turns that had led to this moment. The Forbes article that was supposed to represent professional validation had instead become the catalyst for a family reckoning that revealed truths I had suspected but never confronted directly. Emma was waiting in our apartment with tea and concerned questions about how the dinner had gone. When Amy and I walked in together, her surprise quickly transformed into warm welcome as she helped my sister settle into the guest room and listened to our account of the evening's revelations. "I can't believe they recorded those conversations," Emma said, shaking her head in amazement. I can believe they said those things, but I can't believe Bruce had the foresight to document it." I learned early in business that people will deny saying things they absolutely said, I explained. Documentation protects you from revisionist history. Over the following weeks, Amy proved to be everything I had hoped she would become, once freed from our parents' limiting expectations. Her design work was genuinely talented, and her business instincts were sharp despite her lack of formal training. I connected her with potential clients through my professional network, helped her establish proper business accounting systems, and watched her confidence grow as she realized her entrepreneurial dreams were achievable rather than foolish. Emma and Amy became close friends, bonding over shared experiences of watching me work ridiculous hours and shared frustration with family members who didn't understand ambitious career goals. Having two supportive women in my life created a sense of chosen family that felt more authentic than anything I had experienced with my biological relatives. Jake surprised me by calling 3 weeks after the dinner confrontation. His voice was humble in a way I had never heard before, as he asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss the business challenges his company was facing. The conversation was awkward, but productive, with Jake acknowledging that he had underestimated both the complexity of my work and the effort required to build something from nothing. I offered him consulting contracts renovating CloudSync's expanding offices work that would help him avoid bankruptcy while giving me reliable construction services at fair prices. It wasn't the bailout our parents had probably hoped for, but it was a foundation for rebuilding our relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Our parents sent occasional text messages that I answered politely but briefly. They were clearly struggling with the new reality where their financial problems remained unsolved, and their children had established independence from their judgment and control. But they had also stopped making disparaging comments about my career choices, at least in conversations I was aware of. The Forbes article continued to generate business opportunities and industry recognition that validated every risk I had taken in building CloudSync. But more importantly, it had forced a family crisis that revealed the true nature of our relationships and allowed me to establish boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. 6 months after that awkward dinner, Emma and I got engaged. Amy was my first phone call with the news, followed by calls to my closest friends and business partners. I sent a polite text to my parents, informing them of our engagement, and received brief congratulations in response. The wedding planning process highlighted how much my life had changed. Instead of navigating family politics and competing loyalties, Emma and I were surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated our happiness and wanted to contribute to our future success. Amy designed our wedding invitations, our CloudSync employees planned an engagement party, and our closest friends became our chosen family for all the important moments. My parents attended the wedding ceremony, but not the reception, maintaining their pattern of partial participation that allowed them to claim involvement without fully embracing the reality of who I had become. Jake and Linda came to both events, and Jake gave a toast that acknowledged his past mistakes while expressing genuine pride in his younger brother's achievements. As I look back on that Forbes article that changed everything, I realize it gave me something more valuable than professional recognition or business opportunities. It gave me the confidence to demand honesty in my family relationships, to establish boundaries that protected my emotional health, and to build a chosen family based on mutual support and genuine affection. CloudSync continues to grow, now employing over 70 people across 4 offices and developing security solutions that protect data for hundreds of companies worldwide. Amy's design business has evolved into a successful agency with corporate clients and creative projects that fulfill her artistic ambitions. Emma and I are planning to start a family of our own, committed to creating the kind of supportive environment we wish we had experienced growing up. The most important lesson from that painful dinner conversation is that family relationships, like business partnerships, require mutual respect and shared values to succeed. Blood relationships that lack those foundations are less meaningful than chosen relationships built on understanding and support. I learned that seeking approval from people who are determined to withhold it is a waste of emotional energy that could be better invested in relationships with people who appreciate your efforts and celebrate your successes. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to stop fighting for acceptance from those who have demonstrated they are incapable of providing it. The Forbes recognition was gratifying, but building a life surrounded by people who knew my worth long before any magazine acknowledged it was infinitely more satisfying. What family challenges have you faced while pursuing your dreams? Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own path to success? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who's struggling with similar decisions. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family obstacles and building success on your own terms. And share this with anyone who might need to hear that choosing yourself isn't selfish when others refuse to choose you. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that understands the complicated journey of building something meaningful despite the people who should support you, but choose not to. Remember that your worth isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. And sometimes the family you build is more important than the family you're born into. Until next time, keep pursuing your dreams and surrounding yourself with people who believe in them too.